The morning light filtered through a thin veil of mist, washing the small coastal town in a pale, silvery glow. Samuel Whitaker sat alone on the weathered bench outside his home, a chipped mug of coffee cooling in his hands. From here, he could see the faint outline of the sea, its horizon lost in a soft blur, as if the world itself had forgotten where the sky ended and the water began. He had called David 3 times that week, once on Monday, again on Thursday, and last night each time reaching the same hollow voicemail. Leave a message after the tone. He left none. The silence on the other end felt heavier than words could bear. Inside the house, Linda moved quietly from room to room, her footsteps avoiding the hallway where Sam sat. They hadn't had a proper conversation in days, just small exchanges about bills or groceries delivered without eye contact. Sam stared at the neighbor's maple tree, its bare branches swaying in the wind. He tried to remember whether it had been pruned last winter or the one before, but the thought slipped away, drifting into the fog with countless other small details. Lately, the days bled into each other, names of old shipmates muddled with the faces of people from church, memories of summer barbecues tangled with the salty air of ports half a world away. A sharp gust from the coast made him shiver. He reached into his jacket pocket for the hospital appointment card, the one he kept checking to make sure he hadn't missed the date. Today, 10:00 a.m., Dr. Harris. Tests, scans, something about finding the root of these lapses. He rose slowly, the mug rattling against the bench, and began the walk to the clinic, each step accompanied by the dull ache in his knees. The streets were still damp from last night's rain, glistening under the weak sun. A couple of neighbors nodded as he passed, their eyes lingering just a fraction too long, as if they sensed something amiss. By the time Sam sat in the sterile, white-walled examination room, the smell of antiseptic was already in his lungs. Dr. Harris entered with a clipboard, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sam," he began gently, "the scans show a growth on your frontal lobe. It's benign, but it can cause short-term memory loss. We'll need to run a few more tests, blood work, imaging, and a DNA panel to understand any hereditary factors." Sam nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the window. Beyond the glass, the mist seemed thicker now, as if it knew it had something to hide. The DNA test had seemed like a formality, just another vial of blood among the others drawn that morning. Sam barely noticed it, focusing instead on the faint, rhythmic hum of the MRI machine and the way the ceiling tiles formed patterns that seemed almost nautical if he stared long enough. 2 days later, he sat in the same room. Only this time, Dr. Harris's expression carried the weight of something unspoken. "Sam," the doctor began, choosing each word with care. The results came back. "And there's something you should know. The hereditary markers we'd expect to see passed on to your son David aren't there." Sam's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Harris exhaled that biologically David is not your son." The panel confirmed it with complete certainty. The words hung in the air, heavy and strange, as if spoken in another language. Sam felt the room tilt ever so slightly, though the chair beneath him didn't move. In his mind, images flashed David as a boy running down the dock to greet him, teaching him how to grip a baseball bat. The proud smile the day he graduated college. Not his son. His throat tightened, but no sound came. There was no anger yet, no betrayal, only a deep, hollow confusion that threatened to pull him under. The walk home was slow, the winter sun glaring off wet pavement. When he reached his front porch, Linda was standing in the doorway, arms crossed. "We need to talk," she said flatly, her voice stripped of warmth. Behind her, Sam caught a glimpse of David at the kitchen table, eyes averted, jaw set. Linda stepped aside. Just enough for him to enter. But the moment he crossed the threshold, the air felt foreign, like stepping into a stranger's house. "I know what the tests say," she began, "and there's no point denying it. But what's done is done. The house and land are already in David's name. You can't stay here anymore, Sam." The words struck harder than any storm he'd faced at sea. He opened his mouth, but all that came out was a trembling breath. Minutes later, he stood on the porch again. only now it was with a duffel bag in his hand and the door closing behind him. The sound of the latch sliding into place was final, like a ship's rope being cut. Out on the street, the mist from the morning had thickened into a cold drizzle. Sam began to walk, not knowing where he was headed, only that each step carried him farther from the life he thought was his. The rain followed him down the street, clinging to his coat like an unwelcome memory. Each step splashed in shallow puddles, scattering distorted reflections of street lamps and shuttered shop fronts. The weight of the duffel bag dug into his shoulder, but it was nothing compared to the heaviness in his chest. At the edge of town, the pavement gave way to the old harbor road. The scent of salt and diesel hung in the air, and Sam's eyes caught the silhouette of a rusting fishing trawler moored in the distance. Its hull was streaked with age, yet the shape was unmistakable. It was the same model he had served on decades ago. He stopped the drizzle cooling against his face, and for a moment the sound of the rain faded. In its place came the thud of boots on metal decking, the crackle of a ship's intercom, and the deep, steady churn of engines pushing through open water. The harbor dissolved around him. Suddenly, he was 23 again, standing on the deck of the USS Halcyon, the Atlantic, stretching out in every direction. The wind was sharp, filling his lungs with the taste of salt and freedom. His hands, still strong, then gripped the railing as the sun broke through the clouds in shards of gold. Whitaker, Mayo, call. A shipmate's voice rang out, carrying over the wind. He turned to see a young sailor jogging toward him, holding out a weathered envelope. On the front, in careful handwriting, was the name, Linda Carson. Sam smiled without thinking. Back then, her letters had been the only anchor in the rolling expanse of sea and sky. He tore it open, the paper soft from travel, and read words that promised love, a future, and a home waiting just for him. But as the memory glowed in the warmth of that moment, a shadow crept in, an unease he hadn't recognized then. Certain lines in her letters, vague mentions of family matters, and the way she never spoke much about the months before they met. Details he had ignored in the name of trust. The ship's horn bellowed, pulling him back into the rhythm of the past, and he felt the same certainty he had known then, that everything he was building every hour, worked every danger faced, was for the life they would share. If only he had known that the foundation beneath those dreams was already cracked. The memory shifted like the tide, carrying him from the rolling deck of the USS Halcyon to the warm, sunlit streets of a small New England town. The year was 1978, and Sam Whitaker was 24, freshly discharged from the Navy. His duffel bag was lighter than it had been when he boarded the ship years before, but his heart was heavy with ambition. Linda was there waiting at the bus stop when he arrived. Her hair caught the late summer light, turning every strand into a thread of gold. She smiled as though the months of distance had been nothing more than a passing afternoon. And when she stepped into his arms, the world narrowed to just the scent of her skin and the sound of her breath against his ear. They married that winter, a modest ceremony, in a white church that sat on a hill above the harbor. Snow fell in lazy spirals, dusting the shoulders of Sam's navy blue suit. He remembered watching her walk down the aisle, her eyes glistening, her steps measured but certain. In that moment, he believed in forever. With his military savings, Sam bought a small parcel of land on the edge of town, 2 acres of stubborn soil and wild grass that sloped gently toward the coastline. He built their first home with his own hands, hammering nails by day and sketching plans by lamplight at night. Linda would bring him coffee in the mornings, her laughter spilling into the open air as she teased him for the streaks of sawdust in his hair. When David was born 2 years later, Sam felt as though the world had finally arranged itself into its proper order. He held the tiny boy against his chest, marveling at the rise and fall of that fragile, perfect breath. In the quiet hours of the night when Linda slept, Sam would sit by the crib and make silent promises to be the kind of father he'd wished for as a boy, to never let his family want for anything to give them the life they deserved. The years unfolded in steady, deliberate strokes. Sam worked long days at the shipyard, his hands cracking in the winter cold, his back aching by the time he came home. But every time he walked through the door to find David racing into his arms, or Linda waiting with a pot of stew on the stove, it felt worth it. On weekends, he'd take David down to the pier, teaching him how to tie a fisherman's knot, how to read the tide, how to spot the first flicker of dawn on the water's surface. He told him stories of the Navy, not the hard ones, but the kind that ended with laughter and the smell of salt in the air. Looking back now, Sam realized there had been moments fleeting, easily dismissed when Linda's gaze would drift away during family dinners or when she'd grow quiet at the mention of certain people in town. He had noticed, yes, but love had made it easy to believe that some questions were better left unasked. In those years, trust was as much a part of Sam as the calluses on his hands. It was the frame on which he built everything else. And it was that very frame, though he didn't yet know it, that would one day splinter beneath the weight of a truth he could never have imagined. The rain had eased into a fine mist clinging to Sam's skin like the breath of a restless ocean. The streets were quiet now, save for the occasional hiss of tires on wet asphalt. His duffel bag felt heavier with each step, though inside it held little two shirts, a pair of worn jeans, a shaving kit, and a pocket knife he'd carried since his Navy days. He passed the diner where he and Linda used to eat Sunday breakfasts, the window fogged from the heat of coffee pots and sizzling griddles. Through the glass he caught the blur of a young couple laughing over pancakes. For a moment, the sound in his head was not the hum of the street, but the light, ringing laugh of Linda from 40 years ago, teasing him about the way he drowned his bacon in maple syrup. The image vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the cold reflection of a man with silvered hair and eyes clouded by something deeper than age. Turning down Harbor Street, he slowed before the shipyard gates. Rusted cranes stood like sentinels, their hulking forms silhouetted against the gray sky. He could almost hear the clang of hammers, the groan of steel under strain, and his younger self among the crews, broad-shouldered, steady-handed, coming home each night with the kind of tired that meant something. A sudden chill ran through him, and his knees threatened to buckle. He gripped the chain-link fence for support, pressing his forehead against the cold metal. The mist around him thickened, and in its shifting veil he saw flashes David at 5 years old, holding a fishing rod almost too big for him, Linda's face smiling as the wind swept her hair across her cheek, the sun setting over their first home, warm light spilling through the windows. But then, unbidden, came the image of the front door closing in his face just hours earlier, the metallic click of the latch sealing him out. The warmth of memory cracked, splintering under the weight of the present. Sam straightened slowly, drawing a breath that felt more like a gasp. Somewhere deep in his chest, beneath the ache of betrayal and the fog of confusion, a thought began to form, not yet clear but insistent. He wasn't ready to vanish quietly into the corners of this town. The tide was turning, and he could feel it. It was 3 nights later when the pain came. A deep, stabbing pressure bloomed behind Sam's eyes, sharp enough to steal his breath. He was sitting on a bench near the harbor, wrapped in a thin blanket someone from the church had given him, watching the moonlight ripple over the black water. At first he thought it was just the cold, but then his vision wavered, the edges of the world tilting, bending. He gripped the bench, willing himself to stay upright, but a wave of nausea forced him to bend forward. His breath ragged. The sounds around him dulled into a distant hum, the salt air turning metallic in his mouth. He knew the tumor was pressing harder now, its silent growth stealing more than just his memory. A hand touched his shoulder. It was Evelyn, the diner waitress, who sometimes brought him coffee in a paper cup. "Sam, you need a doctor. You can't stay out here like this." He managed a weak shake of his head. No hospital. Can't pay for—" The rest dissolved into a wince. The next morning, still pale and unsteady, Sam found himself at the public library using one of the old computers. He wanted to check on his veterans' benefits, see if there was anything left that could cover treatment. But when he tried to log in, the screen flashed an alert: access denied. Account closed. Confused, he called the helpline. The voice on the other end was polite but firm. "Sir, your benefits were transferred to a new payee last week. According to the documents we have, your son, David, is now listed as your financial guardian." Sam's grip on the phone tightened. "Guardian who?" "Who authorized that?" There was a pause. "You did, sir. The forms are signed and notarized." He knew instantly. Those papers Linda had pushed across the kitchen table months ago, telling him they were insurance updates. He had signed without reading, closely trusting her as he always had. The bench under him felt unsteady, though it didn't move. In a single breath, he saw it all. David's averted eyes, Linda's cold voice, the door shutting. This wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. They weren't content to push him out of the house. They were stripping away every thread that tied him to his own life. His chest rose and fell, the pain in his skull pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. But beneath it, something else was stirring. Sam Whitaker had been a sailor, a builder, a man who once stared down storms in the middle of the Atlantic. He would not go quietly into the shadows of this town. If they thought they could take everything, they had forgotten who he was. The morning after the call with the benefits office, Sam stood outside the diner longer than usual. His breath fogged in the cold, and for the first time in days his eyes were not fixed on the ground. Evelyn, the waitress, noticed him through the window and waved him in. Inside, the warmth wrapped around him, carrying the smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee. He slid into the corner booth, still clutching the worn duffel bag like an anchor. Evelyn set a mug in front of him without asking. "You look like a man with more than just the weather weighing on him," she said gently. Sam hesitated, then told her, not all at once but in pieces, the tumor, the DNA test, the eviction, and now the theft of his benefits. By the time he finished, Evelyn's expression had shifted from pity to something sharper. "You need to talk to Tom Carver," she said. "Retired police chief. Spends half his days fixing his boat down at the South Dock. If anyone knows how to fight this without getting swallowed in paperwork, it's him." The name pulled at a distant memory. Tom had been a friend once back when Sam was still building his first house. They hadn't spoken in years, but the thought of anyone on his side was enough to get him moving. At the South Dock, Sam found Tom exactly as Evelyn described, crouched beside a weathered skiff, hands black with grease. For a moment, Sam almost turned back, embarrassed by the duffel bag slung over his shoulder, the state of his worn coat. But Tom looked up and recognition flickered immediately. "Whitaker," Tom said, standing. "Heard you were back in town. Didn't expect this." His eyes took in the lines of strain on Sam's face. What happened, Sam told him this time without breaking the story into pieces. Tom listened, jaw tightening with each detail. When Sam finished, the older man didn't offer empty sympathy. Instead, he straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "They've got your house, your land, and now your benefits. But they made one mistake. They underestimated what you've still got left. A name, a record, people who remember the man you've always been." Sam frowned. "And what good is that now?" Tom leaned closer. "Plenty. We'll start by getting the paperwork. I've got a friend at the county clerk's office who owes me a favor. Then we talk to the Vets Association. Once they hear how you've been treated, there'll be people lining up to help. You're not going to win this alone, Sam. But you're not alone anymore." For the first time in weeks, something in Sam's chest loosened. He wasn't sure if it was hope or just the relief of having someone else carry the weight with him, but it was enough to make him nod. "All right," Sam said quietly. "Let's take it back." Outside, the tide was coming in, pushing the harbor water higher against the pilings. Sam watched it for a moment, the steady, relentless rhythm, and felt a flicker of the same resolve. It happened on a Saturday morning, the kind when the whole town seemed to drift toward the farmer's market in the square. The air smelled of fresh bread and wood smoke, and the sound of buskers carried between the stalls. Sam stood near the gazebo at the center, his duffel bag set at his feet, the worn fabric now a silent witness to weeks of exile. Beside him, Tom Carver adjusted the microphone connected to the small portable speaker the Vets Association had brought. Round them, a handful of familiar faces. Evelyn from the diner, an elderly couple from church. Two men from the shipyard stood like anchors in the crowd. When the murmurs quieted, Tom began. "Some of you know Sam Whitaker. Some of you remember the years he gave to this town, the ships he helped build, the roofs he fixed, the hands he lent without asking for payment. What you might not know is what's happened to him since." He stepped back, gesturing to Sam. Sam took the mic slowly, his fingers brushing the metal as though testing its weight. "I'm not a man who likes to speak in public," he began. Voice low but steady. "But I've been told that if you stay silent long enough, someone else will write your story for you. He told them about the tumor, about the DNA test, about being shut out of his own home. He didn't raise his voice, didn't spit venom. Instead, he spoke in the same tone he might have used to recount a day at sea, measured factual, but with an undercurrent of something deeper hurt that had been honed into resolve. When he finished, Tom stepped forward again, holding up copies of the notarized documents, proof that Sam's benefits had been signed away under false pretenses. This, Tom said, is fraud. And it was done to a man who would have given his life for the people who did it. From the edge of the crowd, a voice cut through. You don't know the whole story. It was David, pushing past a vendor's stall, Linda close behind. Her face was tight eyes darting between the people assembled. I think we know enough, Tom replied. But if you've got something to say, here's your chance. David's jaw worked, but the words didn't come. A dozen eyes were on him, the weight of the town's judgment pressing down. Linda reached for his arm, but he shook her off. Sam didn't look at either of them. Instead, he bent to pick up his duffel bag, then turned to the crowd. I'm not here to take revenge, he said. I'm here to take back my name, my dignity. And thanks to the people standing with me, I will. The applause started with Evelyn, then spread, filling the square with a sound that seemed to wash the chill from the air. Somewhere behind him, Tom was already speaking to a local reporter, and Sam knew the story would travel further than this town. But in that moment, what mattered wasn't the reach. It was the fact that he wasn't alone anymore. The tide had turned, and it was carrying him home. Winter began to loosen its grip on the coast, and with it the light returned, longer days, gentler winds, the first green shoots pushing through the stubborn earth. Sam Whitaker sat on the porch of a small two-room cottage at the edge of town, the wood beneath him warm from the afternoon sun. It wasn't the house he had built with his own hands decades ago. That place with its salt-stained windows and weathered siding now belonged to someone else. But this porch, this simple stretch of planks overlooking the tide, was his. Paid for, with a small grant from the Veterans Association, furnished with a chair from the church basement and a handmade quilt Evelyn had left folded on his bed. The days still had their shadows. The tumor hadn't gone away, though treatment had slowed its advance. Sometimes his thoughts slipped like loose knots, names and dates, tangling in ways that frustrated him. But each morning he woke to the sound of gulls and the smell of the sea, and that felt like enough. Tom stopped by often, bringing coffee and updates from the town. Sometimes they talked about legal follow-ups David and Linda had withdrawn from the spotlight, facing quiet but firm pressure from the community. Other times they spoke of fishing or the way the wind carried the sound of the market bells on Saturdays. On one of those afternoons, Sam found himself standing at the shoreline, the tide pulling gently at his boots. He thought of all the years he had spent building something he thought unshakable, only to watch it wash away. But here, in the push and pull of the water, he understood something he hadn't before. The tide always takes, but it also returns. He turned back toward the cottage, its porch catching the last light of day. Somewhere behind him, the horizon was swallowing the sun, painting the water in streaks of gold and crimson. And for the first time in a long while, Sam didn't see loss in that fading light. He saw promise. He climbed the steps, the wood creaking under his weight, and sat down in the chair. The quilt lay over his knees, the air cool against his face. A gull wheeled overhead, its cry sharp and free. Sam closed his eyes, breathing deep, and let the sound of the tide carry him not back to what was but forward to what could still be. Weeks later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Sam walked to the harbor with a small wooden box under his arm. The sky was a soft wash of pale blue, the kind that promised a calm day at sea. He reached the end of the pier where the water lapped gently against the pilings and set the box down. Inside were mementos, photographs of his Navy days, a letter from Linda written during their first year of marriage, a tiny pair of boots David had worn as a child. He had carried them for years through every move, every season. They were pieces of a story he had once believed unbreakable. Sam ran a thumb over the letter, the paper thin and fragile now. Then, without ceremony, he placed it back in the box, closed the lid, and lowered it into the water. It floated for a moment, drifting away from the pier before the tide claimed it. He watched until it vanished, swallowed by the same horizon he had chased as a young man. There was no bitterness in his eyes, only a quiet acceptance. As he turned to leave, Evelyn called out from the shore, waving a thermos in one hand. "Coffee's hot." Sam smiled small but real and walked toward her. The sun had climbed higher, spilling light over the harbor, and for the first time in years he felt as though he wasn't walking away from something but toward it.